on building a digital culture.
Thank you for the introduction there and for stepping in at the last minute to facilitate this for us. What we've got first off then is with this being a workshop, we wanted to make it really interactive and we want to gather feedback from you and your input into your thoughts of digital skills, digital technologies and digital culture. So what we've shared, and Arielle's put a link in the chat, is we put a link to a Jamboard, which we're going to be using throughout this workshop. We've got a series of different boards up there with prompt questions. But what we thought we'd like you to include at this point is if you could just share what you think the opportunities and challenges to digital technologies present to you and the people you're leading or the people that you work with. The Jamboard should be open that anyone can add a link to there, and you just do that by adding a sticky note that Arielle's there shared on the screen for us to have a look at. If you can't add to the Jamboard, please just pop it in the chat and we can pull information over after if that's easier for you in terms of accessibility. So I can see a few things are coming up there already. I think we'll move on with the presentation, but please do keep adding things as we continue onwards with this. So just click on there. So yes, thank you today. We're going to be running this workshop over the next 40 minutes or so on creating a digital culture. I will mention who I am. My name's at the bottom of the screen, but I'm Susan Halfpenny and I'm presenting with my colleague Arielle Redman. And we work in the teaching and learning team at the University of York. And so our team is responsible for developing digital skills. We're based within the library, but we work very closely with IT. So just a little bit of a background about how we are working. So we'll move forward now with the presentation.
So let's talk about the digital age. So obviously you'll hear everyone talk about how we're in a digital age, but what does that actually mean for us? What does that actually look like? So let's look at some research to help us with that. So let's look first of all at the global perspective. So let's look at what research suggests is where we are and where we're kind of heading. So 84% of employers are rapidly digitizing their working process. And that's really important for us to think about in terms of what skills we need now, but also what skills we as employees and future employees will need in 5 or 10 years time. So technology is something that, digital processes, we can't run away from them essentially. And 44% of the workforce likely moving to remote operations. And this is something that's obviously been speeded up by the pandemic and the impact that that has had on the workplace. And 43% of businesses are reducing their workforce due to technological integration or automation by 2025. That's the expectation. And that is something really important to note, because that will obviously have a massive impact on the types of jobs that there will be. But it's not all bad news, because 34% of businesses do actually plan to expand their workforce due to the technology integration by 2025. But that will, of course, have those impacts, have that impact on what kind of jobs there are. And that's from the World Economic Forum. So if you're interested in that kind of global perspective, have a look at that report. So let's narrow a bit more down to the UK perspective. So what is it like for us here? So there's this really fantastic report called Disconnected that has only recently emerged. And it talks about how important basic level digital skills are to almost all employers. It's interesting to look at the different definitions of what basic level digital skills are, but we'll have a little bit more of an explore of that as well as we go through this, to see kind of what our perceptions are of that, what actually constitutes those digital skills. And 27%, so that's over a quarter of businesses, say that the majority of workers require actually advanced digital skills. And to have those advanced digital skills, you have to have a kind of baseline to start from to even get that far. So it's really useful for us to think about and reflect on our own working environments, what this actually means for us and what it might mean for us in 5-10 years' time. And 23%, so almost a quarter of employers, say that their current workforce lacks basic digital skills. And thinking about the other statistics that we've read, that's quite substantial amount of the workforce that don't have that basic, that first step on the ladder to everything else that the digital world has to offer. So it's quite a shocking statistic, really. And 37% say that their current workforce lacks the advanced digital skills. So how do we get our workforce there? Is that relevant to us in our workplace? It's worth thinking about all of these things. It's a really, really good report, that. So over to you, Susan.
Yeah, so we thought we'd talk a little bit here about, we've looked at the global or the UK perspective, but where are we coming from at the University of York? So at York, we've been focusing on staff digital skills for quite some time. So it started with the government Make or Break House of Lords report that you might have come across, which came out in 2015. We've looked at the recent research now, but that's what really was a catalyst for us thinking about staff digital skills at York. So back in 2016, we launched a whole programme of projects to address staff digital skills. So we looked at library and archive staff digital skills, so sort of starting with our staff to find out what their skills level was and how they felt about digital technologies. We also did a project looking at digital leaders, so working with our leadership and action courses to look at how we could embed digital skills in there. And we had a series of mini projects that looked at how we could create training pathways for various things, so IT essentials. So as a result of that journey of 3 years worth of projects, we actually got a bit more buy-in at a senior level at the University of York. So this is our new Vice-Chancellor who joined us in 2019, I think it was, or the end of 2018 at the University of York. And Charlie Jeffries at York has been very supportive. We've got this quote here about how digital technologies are fundamental to all the, learning, research and teaching that we do, all the functions at the institution. So what we did is we developed a framework, and a staff digital skills framework, which has been endorsed by our Vice-Chancellor, and a range of different sort of training programmes and things that our staff could engage with. And the aim of all this was really to think about what our vision was for staff digital skills, and how we could embed that across the whole culture, that it is the responsibility of everyone to be able to develop these skills and have conversations about how we use digital technologies effectively. So our vision that we came up with is we wanted a culture of digital curiosity, making the perceived impossible possible. And I'll talk a little bit more about that perceived impossible and possible a bit later in the presentation as we explore some of the findings from our previous projects. But what we really wanted to achieve at York is we wanted staff with a digital mindset. So we really wanted to think about digital fluency. So using a range of different digital tools and technologies. We wanted to look at new ways of working and how we could transform processes. So really using these new technologies in the best way for how we work in different teams, in different groups, and as a section and as a university. We wanted people to be able to reflect on the success and failures that they did with encountering technologies, because we knew that there's a fast pace and technological change that people would need to deal with. And finally, we wanted digital leaders who would model and inspire. So I mentioned one of our projects with digital leaders. We knew that it was really important to engage at all levels of the institution, but to really have leaders who could model these behaviours and acknowledge that the responsibility of using digital tools is everyone's there to make sure that it's successful. So at this point, we thought it'd be useful again to get a bit of your thoughts. And I can see there's loads of activity in the Jamboard for the challenges and opportunities there. So that's great. We can take a look at that and reflect at the end. If you just click on the link at the top of the screen on the Jamboard, if you're in there, you can move on to the next page. So Arielle's demonstrating that helpfully for us on the screen there. And what we can do now is just think about what your institution's approach to digital skills. I think we're quite mature at the University of York. As I say, we've been looking into this since 2015. It's had its challenges to get to the stage. There's still a lot more work that we need to do to enable a digital culture and to ensure all our stakeholders are on board. But we thought it'd be useful if you could share your reflections of where you're at, and also if you have any links to useful resources or reports that you've come across in your research, please pop them in there as well, because we want to ensure these Jamboards can be shared after this session so that we have this resource to go back to and reflect on. So if you just want to add things to that as we as we continue on with the presentation. We won't pause for the exercises because we've got quite a lot to get through, but please do add to that in the background. Or in chat if you can't use the Jamboard, obviously. Okay, so digital change. I mentioned that we wanted to have digital fluency as one of our objectives at the University of York, and how we were thinking about transforming processes. And I think you can't do a presentation on digital skills and digital culture without touching on digital change. And as we know, we are living in a time of exponential digital change. You know, your mobile phone, I love this example. So the processing power in your mobile phone, it was actually the iPhone 6 that this was. So we've moved on quite a bit from there in processing power, actually have more processing power than the computer that launched the successful moon landing. So we know we've had massive amounts of change. Another fact that's out there is, you know, your smartphone has more processing power than the first supercomputer, which kind of took up a whole room of space. And we've got it all here now in our pocket. We've got that technology. So we know that things change so quickly. We have transient technologies that come and go. We have technologies that we think are new now, like video conferences, Zoom, but actually you look back and, you know, Zoom was about for quite a few years. It's just we use it now because we needed to, and that kind of thing. So there are some technologies that appear as new but aren't as new as others, but it's all about building those together. And it's really the processing power that we're seeing that is enabling us to use technologies in such new ways. You know, who knew that you could carry your work around in a phone? Now we probably want to go to not carrying our work around in a phone. So this does come with these technical change, comes with its challenges as well. So thinking about those challenges then, when we were doing our research at York and thinking about staff digital skills, we wanted to engage a lot of staff. And I was thinking about this in Regina's talk. It is about the people. It's not about the technology. You need that emotional intelligence. You need to understand others. And what we found time and time again, regardless of the groups that we spoke to, that there were lots of psychological barriers with adopting new technologies, attitudinal, but also quite deep-rooted in terms of how people feel about the use of technology, how they feel about their digital skills. So I just want to raise some of the ones that came up here. As you might recognise some of these. Maybe you feel this way of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It does what I want it to do. I don't agree with change for change's sake. You know, it works for me. You know, I haven't got time to learn anything new. Time comes up a lot of the time as a barrier. And I've always done it that way. So maybe you can recognise some of this. And I'm not dismissing these as reasons as well. I think you've got to be respectful and you've got to understand what people's feelings are about technology, what their barriers are. And that's part of any digital culture project, is talking to people. It's really not about the technologies. It's about listening to people, what's working for them, what isn't working for them, and how they're going to work as a group. Because quite often when we're brought in as IT trainers to work with people, it isn't about teaching someone how to use the technology. It's more talking about some of those big business critical skills, such as teamwork, collaboration, and how we feel and how we work as a group. So having that emotional intelligence and that respect for others' views as well, of acknowledging that technologies are difficult. It does take time to learn things and that kind of thing. So I pretty much support most of these are acknowledged. Then one of the ones that I always do quite question is, we've always done it this way, because this implies an endpoint. This implies that we're not going to change. And I always challenge back with this of, so when do we stop then? So if we're thinking about technologies, when do we stop? Do we stop when we got a biro over the quill? Do we stop when we got a graphic user interface? Do we stop now when we're in cloud computing? One thing that we can say for certain when we're thinking about digital technologies is that there's going to be change. Well, we can say that about life itself, and anyway, can't we? Heraclitus told us that, back in ancient Greece. So we know that that's a certainty. So it's kind of working with people to go, what are those issues? What are those barriers? And how can we ensure that that's that change? Because we are going to have that change ongoing.
So if change is certain, then what do we do about our own processes? How do we transform them? How do we change them so that we can use the processes which are the most effective and most efficient for us? So there's really two approaches, and we'll just talk about those for a moment. So there's the translation approach, which is where you do just replace every step in a physical model, so something in the real world, with something that is technology based. And we'll talk through an example in a moment. And this, it does achieve the desired result, but it just uses the same process as you would use, in that physical space. So what is the alternative to that then, than just substituting things and translating them directly into the technology kind of process? So there's also the transformation approach, which is where you reimagine how you do something based on what tools you have available to you in technology. And that just means that you really take advantage of actually the strengths that are offered to you through digital tools. And this achieves the desired outcome, but it does come with change, and it uses this transformed process, which ideally should be more efficient than just substituting step by step what you were doing before. So let's have a look at how that actually works in practice. So there's this share versus send example I'll go through. So you want to share a document with a group of people, maybe you want to get some ideas about it, get their comments, and you have this document, and so you attach it to an email and you send that email to multiple participants. And that basically creates multiple copies of the same document because they download it from their email onto their own PC. And that really comes with some issues because it makes it hard to know which version you're getting. So, if they all send it back with various comments, it's very tricky to keep track of it all. And it also it makes it very difficult to know what is then done with the copy of that document that you have sent. And this obviously raises extra concerns if it's something that may be sensitive in the workplace. So that's, it comes with some problems, but of course that's what you would do in a physical space. If you didn't have access to a computer, you'd maybe copy something out and hand it to individual people, but when you're working with digital tools, you don't actually have to do that approach. So rather than having multiple copies of something, you can share documents in a different way. So you can share a link to a Google Doc, for example, or you could use Word through OneDrive. You can tell we're a Google institution. So you can remove the duplication, you can enable that real-time collaboration, and you just have that one document, that one link in the cloud, and then lots of different people can access that one copy of that one item. Really effectively means that you can share something. And I imagine many of you are probably familiar with this process, but it's just helpful, I think, to look at actually what the benefits of that approach really are. So if you are doing that already, that's fantastic, but it's useful to think about why you're doing that. So there is, of course, that difference between shared spaces and collaborative spaces. So, of course, I don't know if you're working in the same way, if you're working remotely some of the time, but of course you might be used to having had like an L drive or an M drive, basically a mapped drive that you could have used if you were, on site or logging in through VPN or something like that. But basically that just means that you have a copy of a document on a shared sort of drive area, but only one person could access that at once. But the benefit of collaborative spaces is that you have that one file, but lots of people can be in the same place at the same time and can work on that document at once. So that's the idea, that you can work in the same online space, but that does, of course, need those collaborative applications. But that's the beauty of this constantly changing, constantly developing technology, that actually, you know, if you go with it, then you can actually really make more processes efficient. But with that comes a big question about how we actually work. So what are our default positions? So do we naturally work in private unless there's actually a reason to collaborate? So are we working on documents on our own desktop, for example, or are we using Google Drive or OneDrive to collaborate with people and share those files? Do we work with maybe Microsoft Office applications on our desktop unless there's a reason to use Google and OneDrive? And you know, do we communicate primarily through email rather than using you know, more chat applications like Google Chat, Teams, or Slack? So it's useful to think about these and think about what maybe our personal default position is, what our team's default position is, maybe what the institution's default position is. And we're going to have a moment to reflect on that in just a second. So what is the flip side of that? So this idea that actually, you know, we will work in a collaborative space unless there's a reason to work privately. And there are sometimes reasons to work privately, and that's fine. But what is our default? And we'll work with Google Workspace applications unless there's a reason to use something that is specifically on our own device. And we'll communicate using agreed channels. So, for example, Slack, Teams, comments on documents, or calendar items, things like that, so that we can see where we are as well. Just that whole, you know, we're not just talking about items of work, but we're also talking about, you know, not just outputs, but also just that sharing, you know, where are we, how do we work, you know, can you tell where I am by looking at my calendar type of thing. So it's that whole default position that kind of pervades everything that you do in that digital space. So what are your default positions? So let's have a look back on that Jamboard now and have the opportunity to just put a marker kind of where we are in that digital kind of default position. So if you just go to the top of the Jamboard again and go to number 3, you can just put in like a little circle where your kind of default is. So have a go at that now, and we'll have a look afterwards and see what our defaults are. And there's no judgment here, because, you know, depending on what you're doing and what your team is doing and on all of that, it might be very different for different people, but it's useful to reflect. So we'll move on, but we will come back to that. We'll come back to it all if we have time. So let's have a look at actual digital skills then. So it's great to have that reflection on you know, what we're actually doing, but how do we improve our own skills, and what does it actually mean to have digital skills? So JISC have this really useful framework, which is really useful to you know, start that reflection process again on, you know, what actually digital skills are. So they have this useful kind of diagram. The circle is very helpful to think about how these things all intertwine. So the basis of it all is ICT proficiency. So this idea that actually using tools and having those, again, basic level digital skills underpins everything else that you can do with technology. So then you have these other categories: information data and media literacies, digital learning and development, digital communication, collaboration and participation, digital creation, problem solving and innovation. These all intertwine. And then around them all, kind of tying them together, is this idea of digital identity and well-being. So using the tools in a safe way, which is really important that we underpin everything with, to create this online persona projection of yourself. So what does that actually do to ourselves from the identity perspective. So it's great that we have this kind of as a basis to start thinking about. So how do we actually facilitate development of these literacies that we all need? So there's this really useful Beetham and Sharp pyramid model of digital literacy development, and that's really helpful. So let me just talk you through that. So you know, at the bottom of this, so the most vital thing that you can have is access and awareness. You need to know something is there to be able to then do anything about it. If you don't know it exists, what can you possibly do to learn more about it? You need to know about it. You also then need the basic skills to use those applications and IT systems. And then you need to be able to practice them. You need to be able to incorporate them into your day-to-day activities and practices. And then ultimately, they become part of our attributes, part of our identity, who we are in both the physical and the online world. So these are really, you know, useful to think about, because actually, you know, digital skills are the enabler. You know, once we've agreed on our kind of default working position, we need to think about the skills that are actually considered within that default position, what we actually need to know so that we can work in that way. It all interlinks and underpins each other. And, you know, it has real value because rather than focusing on different types of digital literacies, for example, you know, finding sources, critically evaluating sources, and so on, this model actually distinguishes between, you know, the access, the skills, the practices, the attributes, and articulates actually how they relate in that hierarchy. So that's a particularly useful model to think about when learning those skills. So over to you, Susan.
Yeah, so at the University of York, we've been using the JISC model, and you may well have adopted that or a different framework at your institution. I know it's quite mature, that framework now, and we're using that, and it comes with a range of diagnostic tools. But when we were doing work at the University of York, we decided that we would develop our own digital skills for working practice framework. And the reason behind this is we did like the JISC model, but we were also inspired by the government basic digital skills framework as well, because what we wanted to do with the work that we were doing was ensure anyone in any grade at the University of York had these digital skills for working practice. That was our aspirational goal. We wanted to work with everyone. We wanted to be inclusive to ensure that everyone had these skills. So we wanted to use a combination of the two frameworks to enable ours. And also, we've mentioned a couple of times, we're a Google institution, and with that comes some particular skills that you need to learn and understand the models of sharing and cloud first principles that Google applications are built on. So we wanted to articulate that. So we developed our own digital skills for working practice framework, which is, as I mentioned, being endorsed by our VC and also endorsed by our chief operating officer, CEO, who's taking this forward to ensure that we can embed this across all the roles at the University of York. So our framework looks into 6 areas, and it's got about 24 skills within there. So it's IT essentials, innovation, adaptability, and problem solving. So really the behaviours there, but put into a nicer way, because we didn't want to say that you didn't have the behaviours for the skills, the ethics and security that we thought were really important, personal effectiveness and teamwork and collaboration, information, media and data, creation and communication. So when we launched this to staff back in, it was 2019 that we did a big launch, and we got a lot of feedback from staff. The area that everyone was feeling that they needed to focus on really was that personal effectiveness, teamwork and collaboration. And I think that takes us back to what Arielle was exploring in terms of those default positions, and it's about working as a team and understanding how we're going to work together using these technologies. It's about us first and then the technology second.
So there's 10 minutes remaining, including questions.
Okay, we're getting to wrapping up now. So that has meant that we've actually evolved in the last few years. Well, 12 to 18 months, really, about thinking about this, from moving beyond it being about digital skills and our digital skills framework. We think that's an important tool, and we have a diagnostic that people can use to see what level they're at of those digital skills, and actually having that articulation of where we want to be. But what we've started doing now is running workshops like this with our staff, which are more considering that digital culture. And in 40 minutes, we've delivered what usually is a 2-hour workshop, where we usually get our colleagues to discuss how they work as a team, what their default positions are, what the skills are they need to develop. Because it really is, for any successful digital transformation project, it's not about the technologies, it really is about the people, and working with people to understand it, to ensure that we can overcome those psychological barriers and develop the skills that are needed to be able to effectively use this, and articulate how we are going to use this, what the benefits are for that. And we've been working really closely with IT colleagues. So, I always think one thing missing from ITIL, which is one of the project management courses for models for IT, is it's got great process for change, but it forgets about the people. So we've been working with them to think about how we embed the skills. So what we think enables digital culture is having that direction and leadership, space to experiment and explore. Not everything's going to work straight away. Look at it, review and change it, having time to develop that knowledge and understanding, and a high challenge and high support culture that you've got there within your management structure. So with that, we have got one more Jamboard activity, which we hope you can fill in, but I do want to make sure that there's time for questions as well. But we thought it'd be useful for what we ask our staff to do when we run workshops like this, is think about one thing that they could do now, or one thing their manager needs to do, one thing they think their team needs to do, to be able to sort of take some actions to develop skills and start to build a digital culture. But so the Jamboard, it's the next page of that if you do want to share, or if not, if you just want to write on a piece of paper and think about what you might need to do in terms of your digital skills, or what you might need to work with at your institution. And I know there's been lots of activity on the Jamboard, so thank you ever so much for that. But if we just flick back to the slides at this point, I think we've just got one summing up slide, haven't we now, Arielle, before we move on to questions?
Yeah, so we just want to leave you thinking about how you can use technology to transform practices and processes, and to really think creatively about what will work for you, what will work for your team. And the other side of that is thinking, just that reminder of thinking about your team and how you want to work. Think about how you're going to work with other people to achieve this, what skills you might need to develop, and just that reminder that it's about the people and not the technology that we need to do. On our final slide, we have got some links to some of our resources, which are open for you to be able to use, and they're all licensed under Creative Commons. So if you do want to take a look at them and use any of them, please do. But we will take some questions now if you've got a little bit of time.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Susan and Arielle, for a really fascinating workshop. So if people do have questions, if you could pop your hand up and switch your mic on, that would be fantastic. If you're unable to do that, please do put it in the chat. I can kick things off. So following the pandemic, a lot of people were obviously forced to work from home. And I think one of the benefits that could be a selling point to staff is maybe that acknowledgement that digital technologies can enable you to do a lot of your work from home and enable more flexible working. So an example from the Open University where I work is that previously we would have said you had to be on campus to take phone calls, but we have proved that actually you can take phone calls from home. So I'm wondering, do you think you will adapt the training sort of going forwards to take that into account?
Do you want to answer that, Susan?
Yeah, I can do. So we have actually been doing quite a lot of work with people since the remote working. As you say, it's been a big push of how do we change that? We've got a big change programme at the University of York on digital first to really think about that. And some of the broader reports have actually shown that we've made 5 years worth of progress in the time of the pandemic, and that's that people getting online for the first time and that kind of thing that we're seeing there. That for a while, I kept reading these reports since like 2015, 2015, it'd say the same level of skills gap and that kind of thing. We didn't seem to be making progress where we have done there. So I think, it's like you say, it's using that as an opportunity, and once again asking staff how that's been helpful to them to be able to work from home and how they can continue to do that, and moving from that initial model to a more mature model of how do we work, what does it look like when we're doing hybrid working and that kind of thing. And things like digital wellbeing, I think, are going to be the areas that we'll be picking up on as part of this as well, of ensuring that, if you can work from home, what hours are you working from home? How do you switch off and that kind of thing. So I think, over the next few years, that's what we'll be looking at York. It really is how we can look and work in this hybrid digital skills, the skills that are needed for the hybrid working.
Yeah, and I think from a lot of the sessions that we delivered when remote working, there seemed to be this much higher appetite for knowledge about digital tools, and I think it's just capitalizing on that appetite really, and while people are still keen and see that it can actually help them to really engage with them.
Excellent, thank you. We've got a great question from Anjad in the chat. What did you identify as the core digital skills needed for library staff?
This is a good one because we didn't focus on particularly a role, you see. So what we identified as our core digital skills were identified across the board. We are now getting requests as we work with groups to better embed this, of going, what does this mean for sort of our cleaning staff? What does this mean for our project management staff as we work with DTEF, which is our sort of estates and technologies side of the directorate. So we didn't actually do that kind of work that were the core skills for our library staff, even though we did a project on that. We just used them looking at the whole of the JISC range of skills to see where people are at, to then inform our overall framework. So that's an area that we haven't looked at in our research, but I would be interested in hearing other people's ideas if they've come across that and done any work in terms of digital skills specifically for library staff.
Yeah, so maybe if people could get in contact with Arielle and Susan, if they have done research into that area, I'm sure that would be great. So Phil asks, how do you make the distinction between baseline digital skills for all or most library staff compared to the advanced digital in areas such as cataloguing and working with researchers?
Yeah, so in our framework, we've acknowledged this, that we've said that this is just for the broader, and it is that kind of working with people in terms of those advanced. So what we've did as part of our training pathways work is we did start to identify some of those skills which might be for specific areas and for specific developments and that kind of thing. So we've started to offer things in terms of coding and stuff like that because of computational changes needed for that. We haven't done some of the specifics in terms of, it mentions cataloguing there. What we've done is we've worked with departments when we've looked at that kind of thing of how are they delivering training, because we might know about cataloguing. Well, I'm a librarian by profession, so I do know about these things, but I wouldn't know if I go into sort of some of the research computing, high performance computing. I don't know necessarily those skills that are needed for that. So we've looked at kind of, once again, what are going to be the core offering, what could be seen as core advanced, so things like programming, as I've mentioned, and then sort of what isn't in our sphere of support as well, which we would have to get specialist kind of trainers in to be able to deliver that.
Excellent. So Robin asked another great question. Do you have any plans to extend digital skills training to students?
Yeah, so we deliver a whole range of digital skills training to students as well, looking at everything from those core skills to help them get through their dissertation or, earlier essays and things like that, to digital creativity. We look at a lot about just providing space to really encourage creativity and curiosity when it comes to digital tools, to really promote that interest in just learning new digital skills that can then be kind of widespread an approach. You can use them basically for your degree as well as for just creative outlets, which is something we're really passionate about as well. And a lot of that we also offer to staff at the same time, so they can have that creative space too. And we're actually also now starting to look at, if we're saying the staff that we want should have these skills or should aim to have these skills, then we need to make sure that the students that we are having as our alumni have you know, at least some of those skills as well. So we're looking at maybe translating that digital skills framework for staff also to the students that graduate from our university as well.
Fabulous. And as we're running out of time, I will take the final question, which is from Kerry. Do you have any tips or advice for implementing such widespread cultural change? Big question.
A lot of patience and determination. As I say, this has been something that we've been working on since 2015-16. That's the staff side. Arielle's mentioned the student side. We started working on that in sort of more like 2013 to be able to do that. I still don't think we've got the engagement that I'd want at this stage. I do want to be honest, because it does take that time. We've got engagement on the professional services side. Definitely, we have got that buy-in there. We do, it is acknowledged in the sort of the PDR process and objectives for our professional staff. We're just now making some more inroads into working with our academic staff and researchers and going to UTC, which is our University Teaching Committee and University Research Committee. So I suppose with that patience, it's going and talking to a lot of people at different committees, but not just committees, finding your friends and allies. So, you know, we worked on the Leadership in Action course, which was great because we got to meet people from across the institution so that you could run your workshop and then afterwards go, oh, actually, do you fancy going?
Oh, I think.
So,
well, you're breaking up a little bit, Susan.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so it was really the patience and sort of those building relationships and using your networks.
Excellent. Well, thank you very, very much again for a fascinating workshop, and thank you to everybody who attended today for your really interesting questions. All that remains for me to say is that at 11:30 we've got our silver sponsors presentation, so do head across to that to find out all about our silver sponsors. And then at 12 o'clock we have the quiz. So pop along to the quiz as well, and there's always the chat and cake channel as well if you want to socialise and network there. We'd love to hear your views about the conference, so please do fill out the feedback survey, which is in the feedback channel and will also be in the wrap-up email that you get sent. And also there's the sponsor treasure hunt with the prizes, so find those 8 cartoon characters and fill in the Google form for a chance to win prizes. So I will let you have a break now before the sponsors presentations. Thank you again, Arielle and Susan, and I will see you all in another session. Bye all.